The gentleman from New York, Mr. Torres, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. During his State of the Union, President Biden reported that the U.S. has seen the fastest job growth in history. The U.S. has had the fastest economic growth in more than 4 decades, and the U.S. among advanced economies has had the fastest economic recovery from COVID. And so the inflation that we've seen is the consequence of a strong economy colliding with a supply chain disrupted by COVID-19. Given the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the inflationary pressures that could likely follow, is there a risk that raising interest rates could backfire, that it could cause a recession without actually reining in inflation? How significant is the risk of stagflation?
Well, there's several questions in there. So our goal, of course, is to raise interest rates in a way that restrains inflation and gets it back to levels that we would call consistent with price stability, and do that without while still sustaining an expansion and a strong labor market. That's our goal, and that's how we'll use our tools. There are no guarantees in life, but that is our intention and what we propose to do.
The U.S., as you know, has severely sanctioned Russia, and Russia is expected to engage in cyber retaliation. There are financial institutions, commercial banks that invest up to $1 billion every year in cybersecurity. How much does the Fed invest in its own cybersecurity every year?
I don't have a dollar amount for you, but it's quite substantial. We have very good cyber people, and at the reserve banks and at the board here in Washington. And as I mentioned a little earlier, we've been at a very highly elevated level of oversight on cyber issues since for several months now, as this event has increased, and we haven't seen any troubling incidents yet, but we remain on high alert.
The ability of the U.S. to hold rogue states like Russia accountable depends heavily on the SWIFT international payment system. In your view, how easily could China and Russia create an alternate messaging service that could seriously compete with SWIFT and seriously undermine the effectiveness of SWIFT sanctions?
I mean, that's an interesting question to speculate about. I think in the near term, that's not something you can create overnight. I know that China does have their system. It's really a question for the longer term and not for the immediate. It's not something you could do quickly like that, but let me think about that.
Fair enough. I have a question about stablecoin. The leading stablecoin issuers have chosen to peg their stablecoins to the U.S. dollar, which to me represents a vote of confidence that reinforces rather than challenges the status of the dollar as the world's reserve currency. The U.S. has no CBDC of its own and is unlikely to have one in the years to come. Do you believe, as I do, that dollar stablecoins can play a role in outcompeting China when it comes to digital currencies?
Well, I'll say it this way. I think there may well be a role for well-regulated stablecoins. I think there's the possibility over time. This is not what we see right now, that they could be efficient and popular among consumers and things like that. I think in terms of helping us compete with China, I don't know, possibly, yeah. I think
I'm assuming it's better to have stablecoins pegged to the dollar than to have stablecoins pegged to China's currency or the currency of a separate country.
I would agree with you that in a way that is consistent with the role of the dollar, and most of the big stablecoins are, of course, dollar-based.
I have a question about the Community Reinvestment Act. Even though the CRA exists to prevent racial discrimination in matters of lending, often referred to as redlining, regulators fail to consider race when enforcing the CRA. Do you think race should be considered?
So we went out with an advance notice of proposed rulemaking a couple of years ago. We took in a whole lot of comments and took those into account, and I think we're now sitting down with the OCC and the FDIC to come up with a notice of proposed rulemaking, and that's one of the issues that we have been thinking very carefully about. And I don't have any announcement for you, but that's something that's going to come out of those conversations.
But you're open to considering it?
It's something we've been considering. We asked for comment on it.
Okay. That's the extent of my questioning. Thank you, Madam Chair.